you guys are in for a treat. We get to hear from artists again, so bonus points.
I'm gonna be in this room a lot today.
But also, some of you may have heard from her yesterday. We have Megan Butts here. She is our senior engagement analyst, and I like to call her like our data wizard. She helps me solve all my problems, so she's a pretty important person at Element. But if you haven't met her before and you weren't in her session yesterday, she did begin her higher education career as a senior ambassador and admissions counselor at SEMO, right? So she knows some people here and has some friends here as well. So I will give the floor to her, and she will blow all your minds.
A reset. There we go.
Sweet. All right, so we're going to be covering Zapier, a really awesome tool today. So we're going to do kind of a high-level overview of it, talk about it just in the grand scheme of things. Then we're going to go into kind of the specific parts, what you will need to set up and do to get started on the right track. Some tips and tricks that I've come across along the way working with some of you in live support through these Zapier instances. And then we're gonna kind of flip it over to a demo example. We're gonna do 3 common examples we see our partner schools using Zapier. All right, so the high-level overview. If you are finding yourself repeating things every single day at your job that are with 2 tools, let's say Google Spreadsheets and Element, you're using Calendly for appointments, or maybe you're doing the events module in Element and you're also putting it on your Outlook calendar. If you're finding that you're doing these things a lot, there's a really good chance that you can automate that connection, that repetition of entering data using Zapier. So what Zapier is kind of like a no-code tool. You select an application that you're using, enter in some basic information, connect it with Element or vice versa, and you can just set it live and it'll start sending data on a trigger automatically between the 2 systems. So the big kind of skeleton structure of what we call a Zap is you're first going to select what the trigger is going to be. What is going to be the event that sends data from your one tool to the other tool. Some common triggers if you're using Element and sending data out of it into a tool is going to be things like they submit a form in Element, they sign up for an event, they join a segment, those type of things. On the reverse side, let's say we're using Calendly or Sheets, those triggers might look like a row was updated, or in Calendly an event was created or a student signed up for an event. So that's your first part, the trigger. Now the second part is typically just if it's the action that you're wanting to happen in your second tool. So if Element is the one that's going to be receiving the data, it'll be things like creating or updating a student, signing them up for an event in Element, recreating a form submission, those type of items. For example, where you want your Element event to go into your Outlook calendar, it'll be things like creating an Outlook event. Kind of simple, just thinking about what you're doing in your tool, and that's most likely going to be your action, or it's going to most likely be your trigger. With Zapier, you can have multiple steps. So let's say they sign up for that event in Element and you want 10 different things to happen. That's doable. But most of the ones we're seeing our partner schools use is just the simple 2-stepper. There's a trigger, and then I want this to happen when that trigger gets fired. So when it comes to actually building the Zap with your tools, there's going to be some important things you'll need to do on the Element side of things. The first one is connecting. So you can't just say, here's my spreadsheet, here's my Element instance. You're going to need to log into those things. So with Google accounts, you're just logging in with your Google sign-in. With Element, you can connect your Element instance, and it will ask for the API URL and your token. Those type of items can be collected from the CS team. So if you're building your Zap for the very first time and you're connecting to your Element instance for the very first time, just hop into live support. talk to my team and ask for those tokens, and that'll be how we connect Element to Zapier. The next thing that you might need to build is a segment. So for moving data from Element to another tool, you might want it to be just a certain group of students that get sent out of the system. That's where you might want to build your segment audience, say, this Zapier is only going to be used for students that sign up for my campus tour. So let's make sure that segment is those campus tour students. The next most important thing is a import or export template. So the import and export module is found under our data and automation section in your Element instance. It's going to be a template, not a task. So there's a template section, and whether you are moving data out of Element or moving data into Element is whether you use the import template or the export template. Think of it as, what fields will be coming in or coming out, and that's how you build your template. Order doesn't matter, which is great. So you can have your first name, last name, term. You can have phone number, whatever order. Just imagine, what data do I want on my Microsoft Outlook calendar event from the Element instance? Or, we're collecting information from Facebook. What sort of information is Facebook going to have that I want to feed into the student profile? So those templates are going to be the fields that we're exchanging. And then the thing I've already kind of discussed about is going into the trigger. We have a set number of triggers. They're expanding as well. So things like form submissions, signing up for an event, a user gets updated or changed, those type of things. Think about what's going to be what gets it started. So in working with Zapier and a few of our partner schools, I came across some things that are helpful just so you're on the right track to getting your Zap connected. So the first part is when you're building your Zap, you have the opportunity to test the trigger. And all that is just, hey, look for a student, look for an event, and see if the data is looking correctly coming in. From the Element side of things, if I'm connecting to my Element instance, that test trigger is going to pull a student. But fun fact, that student may not be in the segment that you clarified, that maybe they didn't sign up for an event. This is just to confirm, hey, you have this student in your system, right? So this might be a random student. That's A-OK. Just make sure they're in your instance when you're testing it. The other thing is hard coding labels and sources. We'll show this in the demo part. But basically, when you are bringing data in from, let's say, Facebook or Calendly, you might want to track, hey, this student came from that app that I connected to. You want to label them with the source of Facebook. You'll be able to do that from the Zapier side. So when you're creating your template in your Element instance, if you're familiar with the import-export module, we have calculated fields where it's kind of like a spreadsheet formula, altering your data a little bit so it comes in clean. You won't need to do that with Zapier. You can just normally map your source name or your source date, and then on the Zapier side, you type in Facebook lead as the source. So you're kind of like forcing that source to come in as that Facebook lead. We'll show that off a little bit later. And then my favorite thing, because I'm a data person, triple check your drop-down fields on your templates in Element. We all love when we're importing new leads and their terms are coming in as fall 2022, but you have it mapped as, oh, that's my SIS code, and it gets mapped incorrectly in Element. Your segments don't work anymore. You're not actually tracking those fall 2022s. So my favorite saying that I picked up from my colleagues, as you're building your templates in Element, if a blue gear pops up, you need to do something. Blue gear, do gear is what I always say. So just make sure that the data coming from the other tools that you're using are coming in clearly, lining up with your data sources for those drop-down type fields. Common ones are the terms, majors, gender, all that fun stuff. All right. We will flip it over to kind of the demo, the meat and potatoes, because I can talk about this all day, but if you don't see it, it doesn't really help.
Yeah, exactly. Thanks, Megan. So a couple more things I want to highlight before we actually get into some of the demos, and maybe we can ask some of you to kind of throw out a couple of examples as well of other tools that you guys use outside of Element. But if you think about, we talked a lot about this connectivity component in Element and us playing nice with other tools. And we have no idea what those other tools are going to be or what you guys are using, but we need to connect with them. We need to send data back and forth. And this is kind of Zapier, right? A lot of people call it, hey, the piping of the internet. That's kind of how their branding works around. They're not the only ones. There's others, but we've made it really easy to kind of do this no code required tooling, right? And we're really big fans of that. So no coding, so we're really big fans of the no coding tools. And then when it comes to integrations, this is kind of the evolution of that. Now, if you're a marketer, if you're working with any data, or if you need to kind of glue something together, this is right up your alley. Anybody can do it. If you're using spreadsheets or you're doing some kind of formulas or whatever in spreadsheets, you're way ahead of the game, and you should be able to kind of do these things. So I'm going to go in and kind of give a couple of examples in here. But before I do that, the first thing that I wanted to talk about is, so if you go to Zapier, Zapier.com, we showed up the component or the URL there. But if you go there and you try to explore, there's a lot of different Zaps or different ways that you're kind of working with different data. So everything around the sun has some kind of integration with Zapier. So it's kind of putting all those pieces together. You can also do things like bringing in emails and so on and so forth. So there's no limitations here. Like the opportunities are endless in terms of what you can do. But I'm going to highlight the Element app. So the way that Zapier calls them is, we talked about, is apps. And essentially, we have to write code to standardize the way that we're communicating with Zapier. They have this notion of triggers, so we let them know when something happens in our system, right? You can call them webhooks, you can call them all kinds of it, but those are instant and those are real time. And if we go down here, every app has a breakdown on what are the actions or what are the components available for that particular application that you're going to need to be able to do. So in this case, we have a trigger. So triggers are those, we need to let Zapier know something. In Element, we have what's called a user updated, because a user in Element can be updated from a number of different things. It can be, like Megan said, from a form or from whatever. So we actually break that down in there. And the other part that Megan mentioned is okay, there's other components that you specify, and we'll take a look at that. We don't want to send every update, every user who gets updated there. We only want to send a segment or a specific set. So that's kind of how we communicate. Something happens in Element, in real time, we send that data over. Even if you have an integration today, most likely they're not in real time integrations. So if you need something to go somewhere right away, this is probably the best way right now. We are introducing more webhooks that are more generic for other things, but we still recommend it, right? If you're sending just a few hundred, records or updates over, or maybe a couple of thousand, it's very, very minimal in terms of the cost that it takes. It reduces the time. The other parts in here that are interesting or important are the actions. What can this app expose as an action towards that particular app? So in this case, we have creating or attending or registering, adding an attendee to an event, right? So now if you want to add an attendee to an event in Element and register them for that event, you can do that through here. I'll show an example of this Zap, because we used Element 451 to manage the event, the conference registrations, but the front end of that, the website was built with Webflow, which is another no-code tool. So we had the really beautiful form in there, and then that one sent the data through Zapier to our event. And then you guys got the emails out. Adding a task to a user, right? So in this case, a lot of times you might want to create a task that's coming from an external system. If you have a spreadsheet and you say, okay, I'm keeping track of the people here, and this is a task that you're managing externally, or somebody else owns that, and now you want to automate every time you add a row in there, you can do that. Adding an activity, a custom activity to a user. So if you thought about now, in Element, you have the ability to add custom activities, those analytic events that you see in there. Well, through Zapier, you can kind of bring something in from an external system. So remember those course activities that I said? Well, you can essentially model endless types of activities in Element. You can call them custom activities, and you can say, registered for orientation. And then you can bring that data in from a spreadsheet as an activity, or you can have perhaps another system that's recording that registration. You can bring that in as well. Creating a conversation is kind of important as well. In some cases, even though Element has introduced inboxes, right, you might have some workflow that says, hey, Zapier can give you an email address, and then if you forward an email to that, it will kind of forward that, you can use that to forward it to Element and start a conversation out of it. So that's another action that we have available. Creating a form. Not every time you're going to have the ability to have those submitted forms. So now you can trigger a form submission based on like a Facebook lead form or a LinkedIn lead form, or you're working with a third-party vendor and they have their own form. So now you want to connect that into Element and trigger that. This is a more generic one, creating or updating a user. Think about this as when you're importing data into Element, this is exactly what it's doing. It's actually updating or creating a user. Think about it as I have a one-row CSV file with all the columns that I need, and then I'm actually going to bring that into Element. So that's exactly what this is doing. It's using one of those templates to say, what does the data look like, map it, and then either if the user exists, import it. If not, we'll show an example. And then the last one is adding a note to a user, because you might just have one ability to add some additional text or whatever, or a note that's coming out of some other system. So again, these are all kind of integration points, and we can expand them if you guys have other use cases. But rather than me kind of talking a little bit about, let's take a look at what that looks like in here. So I'm actually going to go to my Zaps, and the first one that I'm going to show you is that example of what we did for the conference really quick. So let me go here. All right, here we go. So the first one that we did was, I'm going to go ahead and edit this. So we'll start a new Zap, or you can create a new Zap. But in this case, I picked Webflow as an app. And then when I pick Webflow, I can, of course, change it to different apps, right? So you can kind of, start changing things around. But when I pick Webflow exposes a instant trigger, which is in this case form submissions. They have a form on their side, which we kind of had for our Engage. Let's go back here. So when you go to register, this form right here is actually being submitted, and then that's being sent to Zapier as a form submission. And then what we're doing here then is essentially it will tell you, okay, you might have you can connect different instances of these apps, right? Because you as an person, you can have obviously one Element instance, or the way that they think about it is like you might have different accounts on Facebook or whatever it is, right? So you pick which instance you're connecting to, and then you start setting up that trigger, right? In this case, I had to pick a certain, like I'm narrowing it down. I want to pick my site, and then I want to pick the form specifically that I want to bring over. So the next thing, obviously, what it's going to do is it's going to give you a whole bunch of fields, right? So it's going to give you a whole bunch of fields, and we can kind of test that trigger in here. And it's going to say, okay, this is the data that's coming in. So all of these systems they're going to send some data over, so you can kind of take a look at it. Great. So now I have all the data that's coming in, things like name of institution, attendance. This is kind of a very simple data form that's coming in. The next part is, okay, now I can pipe this to anything else. So I can create, I can essentially add a new task here or new action to basically send this data or do something in any other tool that I want to. And you can have multiple of these as well, right? But in this case, I'm going to actually, let me see, delete this step. I don't need it. I already have an element step, right? So I went in and I added, let's do it again one more time so you can see. So if I search for element in here, I'm going to have element data, and it's going to ask me a couple different things in here. It's going to say, okay, I have my account already that I picked. I'm going to pick an event. Actually, it already knew that I needed an event in here. So let me delete this one, and let's go to the next step. So I had an action for creating an event. So here we go. So this is already set up. So I added an action for that event, and then the event that I'm picking up here, it will go into element, and by event, what we mean is that what do you want to do, right? What action do you want to do? In this case, we said we want to create a register an attendee to an event. I continue. It will ask me for my account, and in this case, I've set it up to connect, which is another instance we use for marketing. We actually use Element for some of our marketing as well. So we kind of dog food our own. Is it dog food our own product? So that's so we eat our own dog food, so to speak. So the next thing, it's very, very easy. Then essentially what this is then doing is it's loading in all of the, it's telling me, okay, here's what element is providing me that the data or the things that you can set up and send to element. The first thing that I need to configure is like, okay, what event in element am I sending data to? What is, it's picking the event date because you might have different event dates in there. You can have that be an event date, or you can have some kind of custom configuration for that, so you can kind of pick that as well. And then the next thing, obviously, I'm defaulting into guests of one, but this field can come in as a dynamic field from wherever else. And then it's actually going in and reading all of my custom fields that I have set up in Event 451 under my registration form. Is actually reading all those fields dynamically and saying, okay, these are all the available fields that you can send data to. And how do you want to map the prior steps data to the data that you want to send to element? And this is the paradigm in Zapier, right? So the steps below have access to all of the prior fields or prior data. So you can essentially build things, you can transform data, you can do you can format things, and then you can have access to those fields down below. In this case, just very simply, I'm sending first, last name, email address, name of institution, so on and so forth. I'm defaulting some of these fields. These are drop downs, right? So I can set them to true or false, attended, not attended, canceled. So all of that is, is available. And now this is all the data that I get. I can retest my my registration. That will go to element. If it succeeds, it will actually give me. It says element event was sent to element 41 about 1 second ago. So now I have this set up. I can, because I already have this, as a working instance, I'm just going to delete this draft, but it's already kind of running, right? So I can decide to publish it if that's something that I want to do, retest and review, or I can. This is already published, so it's not letting me do that right now. So I'm going to delete this draft, but this is very, very simple in terms of how that is, how this is set up. And what Megan was showing you before is essentially a preview of what are the things in here, but that was the edit mode. Now they have an edit mode, so you can actually see what's happening without actually editing it or doing any drafts, because this is a live Zap. So anything happening on Webflow, it will now come into Element. All right, any questions so far? Because I think the first example, it's okay. It's a very, very simple one, bringing some data from outside. But now you can see how this can be used for things like Facebook leads, how it can be used for LinkedIn forms, how it can be used for Instagram, other types of forms coming into Element directly. Any questions? Okay, so we all understand the concept, and how Zapier works. There are components in Zapier where you can do branching, you can do logic. So all of that is without writing any piece of code. And I highly recommend that you kind of go ahead and take a look at it. They have the ability to kind of process through multiple larger data sets as well. If something does not have a trigger, right, or an instant. They call it instant because it's a webhook. It's a notification from another system that something happened. But you can actually tie it to data sources that are not necessarily, they don't have that instant part, and you'll just read them every so often and say, hey, is there any new data in there? And I'm going to pick up the new data from there. Like a spreadsheet. Well, spreadsheets actually have that. But like, let's say you might have an SFTP or an FTP picking up a file and doing some stuff in there. All right, so the next part that we're going to talk about is, what was the next one we're going to talk about?
Facebook leads.
Facebook leads, yeah. So let me see if I have any, Facebook, yeah, I have a couple in here. There we go. But this was updated quite a long time ago. But I have a new one in here. So I have this Facebook white paper that I created the other day. And my trigger is new lead in Facebook lead ads, right? So very quickly going through this, I'm actually going to edit it. So I'm going to enter into it. So the event is there is a Facebook lead ad trigger or app. You go through Facebook, you add this action. It tells you, okay, what do you want to trigger it on? New lead coming into Facebook. Then I have to connect it to my Facebook account, right? So this goes through the process of really going, connecting as if you were logging into, let's say, your Facebook ad manager or manage your page. So once you connect to that, then it's going to ask you, okay, what page do you want to connect it to? We have our Element 451 page. What kind of form, right? Because you're creating forms in Facebook as part of that page. Now it's going through, and then you can, again, refresh those fields so you can see what kind of fields are now coming over, from that particular, from Facebook. Now, there's some really interesting stuff in here, right? So if you're doing, if you want to bring in data that is marketing data and this social data around these conversions that are happening or these leads that you're getting on Facebook and on other places, and also if you're doing, for example, if you have different ads that are driving them to those conversions, you can bring that data into Element as well. You can bring it as custom fields, or you can do it any number of ways. But look at the richness of some of this data that's coming in at the individual campaign level, at the individual ad ad set that they had, like the creative, because that's kind of how they're coming in, and then the form ID as well. But this is interesting, right? So this is the ad name, this is the ad ID, and this is the campaign. So I'm going into here and I'm going through, and it's giving me the latest one that I have. Right, so it's giving me essentially the job title, email, and a whole bunch of stuff that I wanted, to bring in. The next part is, because Facebook doesn't give me the name, it gives me a full name. I just need to split that. So I need to do something to split that. And rather than writing anything, which you can, of course, all of these tools are like, well, we're going to give you everything no code, but you can still, for some power users, they still give you more flexibility. So if you want to do something, a little bit more advanced, you can do that. But I'm just going to split up that name that comes in, because if you saw before, let me go back here. That name, it comes in as a full raw name, right? Full name, and I don't have the ability to have a first and last name there. So I need to split it. And Zapier has this basic kind of editing tools that you can do, where you can add a formatter, and then you can say, okay, I want a text formatter. You have other types of formatters as well, in terms of like mapping things together, or numbers, or converting dates, and so on and so forth. So I go through that, and then the first thing that I need to do is I need to split my text, right? I'm splitting my text, which is the full name, that's the input. I'm splitting it by space, and that's the default one. They kind of have really, really nice interfaces around that. And then it's saying, okay, what do you want to pass on? Like, what do you want this to kind of result in? And I just want the first item, the first segment that it finds after it splits that. And that's going to be my first name. Once it gets tested, it kind of pulls that as ed. And now I can continue to the next one. Now I can chain these, right? So I still have access to every piece of data that's coming in, so I can chain them. The next thing is going to be, I'm going to grab the last name. So I'm going to use, again, the same full name, but in this space, I'm going to actually use the last component of that text, right? So it's actually telling you, okay, first, last, whatever segment. In this case, a -1 would be the last one. So I have those components in here. The next thing, I add an element. Action in here. And what it's doing, it's actually I have a create or update user in element. So if I go to element, and if I go to my let's go back here under data templates, we've just created a very simple template that's actually giving me a whole bunch of fields in here. So if I go in here and I edit this, it's giving me first, last name, email, maybe an intended major, date of inquiry, and then some of the sources that we talked about here, right? The sources that's coming in. And when you look at this, there's no custom fields in here, but essentially now if I go to my Zapier instance, I can pick that action, and then in element I can pick the connection. I can now set up things like, okay, which template do you want to use, right? So it's actually going to go to my element instance, pull all the templates that I have available, right, for importing into element. And then if I pick one, then it's going to expand that and give me access to all the fields that I can send data to. In this case, it's giving me that first, last name. If you look at it, email, intended major, date of inquiry, those sources that I had in there, right? And what I can do now is add the fields that are coming from before. I can send those and basically add them directly. So my output from the second step and my output from the third step, which is the last name, and then I'm actually bringing the email from the first step. I'm not adding any intended major, but you can kind of figure out if you have an intended major as the form, then you can kind of bring that in, as well. And you can, if you can do based on the name, which would then come and be mapped automatically into element. Some dates in here, I'm adding the dates on when those forms are coming in, and then I'm coding this says Facebook lead, right? So that's that source that Megan talked about. And the reason why I'm doing that is because on the element side, I have this source code alias here, but let me see, is that, yeah. So I want to bring it in, but was it a name or was it a code?
The code and the name were the same thing.
Okay. So if the code and the name are the same thing, this is actually what's showing up in your, if you go to, let's see, categories and then source codes in here, you're going to see that we have a Facebook. Oh, this is not it. I think we have Facebook lead, right. So in this case, our Facebook, the name and then the code were exactly the same. So that's why we bring in. But usually you want to use the code so that's coming in and then hard code that as well that over here. Of course, you can default things in here. So these are just regular strings if you want to default it. Don't hard code it on the element side. Just let your source drive. So now you can use that same template to send data from other Facebook forms, or maybe you want to have a generic one. You want to have a social, you want to have a social template that kind of collects some pieces of data and kind of send them in. So that's it, right? So if I test this right now, I'm actually, so I can review and test this. I'm actually going to go ahead and review and test. It goes through. And here we go. So in this case, it said that the data was sent to element, and it's telling me that it was actually not created. You saw created before, which what I had done for the first time. In this case, it was just updated, right? So you can keep data up to date this way as well. It's going to find it because we use, on the element side, we use email as a unique identifier to tie the records together, right? So we automatically do that. So this way, you can send data and update data in element based on that email address that's coming in. And that's how we're going to identify them. So if you want to know, it's like, well, how do I know that how to add a note, for example? Well, that person has an email address in element, and the other external systems have email. Most of them have email addresses, so that's how you tie it together. All right, so this was Facebook. The last one I'm going to show you, Teams, right? So a lot of you use Teams, but you want stuff that's happening in Element to essentially, send data to to Slack or to a notification system or where you live every day. So in that case, I'm gonna exit this one. Did I actually create that yesterday? Yeah. All right, well, we'll do it from scratch, right? So that's a good one. So we'll go ahead and we're going to pick, so we're going to pick element in this case. And we'll pick a user in here, user updated, for example, an action user updated. And then I'm going to pick my demo one instance because I have a whole bunch of them in there. And in this case, it's going to ask me, okay, what template do you want to use, right? Like what data is coming from element? Did we have a specific template that we used yesterday?
I think we just double dipped from our other one.
Okay.
Yeah, like Facebook Lead or the Google Sheets one.
Got it. All right. All right, so we'll find, I think it was this recruitment sources and events that I used yesterday, which is fine. So, and then it's going to ask you for things like segments, right? So in this case, I'm just going to pick all prospects, just some generic, segment that I have in Element, and then I'm going to have to pick to say, okay, what type of event is coming from Element? In this case, I want to say, let's say an event registration, right? And if I pick that, then it's going to go ahead and refresh fields. It's going to try to, let me go back. So it's trying to find a record, but I don't seem like I have one. So let's see, user updated. Maybe I have luck with finding, All right, well, this is why we do these things live, right? Just so I can, so let me see if I have another template in here, because I feel like that one wasn't working. Maybe I use this one. All right, here we go. So it went out, it pulled, the template probably had some, because it's our demo instance. So it went out, it pulled the latest user that it found in there that was updated, and then it said, okay, here's all the fields that this template is returning for you, right? And now, again, you can kind of modify the fields that you want in Element to be exported. You can add custom fields, you can add anything in there. And this is going to send that data. So now the next thing that we do is we're going to go through and then we're going to add a Teams, Microsoft Teams account. I already added an account in here. The next thing I'm going to do, I'm going to send a channel message. And it's going to go ahead and pick up my account. And in there, then it'll probably ask me, okay, which team? So I'm going to pick this team. I'm going to pick the channel that I want to send it to. Now, if you're familiar with Teams, you probably know I'm going to send it to event registration channel. And the text can be plain text. And then you can say, okay, name. You can add kind of a markdown in here, right? So name, email, and after this, you have those tokens that are available, right? So I add first name, space, last name. On the email, I go in and I see if I can find show all options. I can find that email address. For now, that's kind of plenty for right now. And then I'm going to go ahead and test it. So it's going to go through, it's going to test it. And it says, great, one message sent. So if I open up Teams, where am I? Where are my Teams? All right, here we go. So So I have my general channel. I had tested one yesterday, but I go to event registration, and actually I see that message coming through now in my Teams. So again, you can kind of modify the data that you're sending, how you're formatting and doing all kinds of things. You can say event registration from this event, and you have all those pieces of data, or user updated. So it becomes really, really easy to now send these notifications and connect them through. All right, so I think we're at time. We probably have time for one question, maybe two, how fast they are, depending on how fast they are. Yeah.
Nobody has any. So is it possible now, it looks like you can use Zapier without having to set up a daily export for things like Facebook leads? Like, can I get a Facebook lead instantly from the time
Yes.
that they submit? Okay,
Yes.
so I can set that up. Is it also possible for, like, if I wanted to bring over a field or two from Campus Solutions to Element instantly, is that a possible connection?
Yeah, if Campus Solutions has a Zapier integration or a Zapier app, then absolutely.
Okay. Does anybody use Zapier for their entire integration?
No.
And
But-
I feel like part of that is because like the SIS system isn't in
Right.
Zapier.
Right. So there's actually a couple of newer SIS systems. I don't know if Populi has it, but some newer ones that have added some of those integrations. But it needs to be a Zapier app, right? And usually the SISs, they're not.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
One more? Yeah.
Do you see more triggers and more actions being developed, or is this sort of like, this is basically all we need?
No, I mean this is version 2.01, so like we'll have more iterations of it as we need more. But right now we just need larger adoption for folks to actually start using it. You have everything in here, right? Whenever a user gets updated in Element, you can kind of send that data anywhere. You can bring in any type of data. So we feel like the actions are pretty extensive. You can bring any data in, but again, if we need more, you let us know, and then we'll put it in. Yeah, exactly. We didn't show you the Google Sheets. It's very, very similar. Google has, like they have a really, really nice integration with Google Sheets, or even Excel Online, so the Office 365. So they have those integrations as well. It makes it really easy for you, for example, to put a form up as a Google Sheet, a Google form, or something really quick. The data dumps into it, and then that automatically now goes into Element. So you can essentially set up a template in Element to be like an application, or start add it as a new form, and then everything kind of goes through automatically. Cool. All right.
Thank you.